Hello, I'm Annalouise, and today I'm talking about yes to tears. I'm recording this video because I feel we often can repress our tears, maybe because we're embarrassed or because actually we don't even realise there's sadness there, perhaps other emotions are layered on top of the sadness. And I know that when I allow myself to cry and give permission to cry, not only can I feel better, but also it can have repercussions in terms of my connections with others and my vulnerability and the way I feel in my body. Tears have been shown to be healing and have positive effects for many, many people. And so it's interesting how many societies have created a culture where when one's an adult, tears suddenly become less permissible. I know for myself, I've been on a journey, like obviously when I was a kid, I'd have cried more easily. And then as an adult, I cried less. And then as I've gone under my healing journey, I've been crying more and more. And my sense is as I've allowed the tears to flow more, then the laughter flows more and the smiles, and there's more energy moving through my body and more ability just to hold it all and to embrace it all, this magical life that we have, the ups and downs, and yeah, all the flavours of life. So I'm curious about you. What journey have you had with tears? Maybe when you were little, perhaps you were different from me. Maybe you couldn't cry when you were little, or maybe you could. And has that changed throughout your life? How's it changed? And where are you now, do you think? On being fully free with your tears, just for them to be there in the moment if they arise, as a 10, to really choosing or not even feeling like crying as a 0. Where do you sit? And yeah, how's that changed for you? It's an interesting question, isn't it? Just to explore, because of course the permission we give for ourselves for any action also gives permission for the people around us. And I have a little story about that. A friend of mine told me yesterday that a neighbour had knocked on her door early, and she was still sort of half in bed, and so she sort of looked out the window. She didn't go downstairs, and she could really see that her neighbour was a bit upset. And so she came downstairs, and the neighbour came in, and she spent time with her, and the neighbour was just crying and saying the things that were troubling her. And my friend was so touched by the neighbour being vulnerable enough to just knock on her door and express what was going on for her. And it opened my friend's heart, it supported the woman who came round. And in a way that's an enormous step of bravery, isn't it, on the part of this lady that came round. And afterwards my friend said, what's beautiful is that now I feel that if I sometime need some support and I'm feeling a bit teary, I could go and knock on her door, which otherwise, for whatever reason, she might not have felt like was available to her. And I love that. I love the fact that the more free we become with our emotions, the more free we can all become with our emotions and our honesty and our vulnerability. Yeah, so I'm going to explore a little bit of the different times we might cry or not cry, and maybe what happened when we were a kid and what happens when we get older, just for information and for awareness, and for us to bring attention to this area so that when we next perhaps feel a tear arising, we have more choice as to whether just to let it out and flow, or whether we choose to hold it back in. And both are good, right? Both are good. It's just being aware of what we're doing and finding new ways of being in the world that help us and serve us to feel better. So one time we might cry is when we get hurt. Yeah, like we've hit ourselves, or we've hurt ourselves, we've cut ourselves. And when we're little, normally kids cry quite easily, don't they? They might have cut their finger and they might be crying. And then perhaps within 10 seconds, they're back playing again, or maybe a minute or 2 minutes or 5 minutes. But they seem to pass through often, unless it's a serious injury, pass through those tears very quickly. When we're an adult and we hurt ourselves, well, curious, first of all, what do you tend to do? Yeah, it's, some of us, I think, have like stopped allowing ourselves to cry, or stopped that crying impulse. Often I see when people hurt themselves, I see them like get up, brace themselves, like, I'm okay, I'm okay. And I can tell from their voice and the way that they're holding their body and the tension in their body that actually there's maybe perhaps a little shock there, or there's some discomfort they don't want to feel, or there's some embarrassment. And often when people hurt themselves and they go into that I'm okay mode, I invite them into just being okay to feel the pain for a little bit, and just to be able to sit with it and take some time and allow it to flow through in the same way a kid would with perhaps a parent or a friend. I have found that I am getting more and more practiced at allowing tears when I get hurt. So before I would have been very much that I'm okay, on I go. And now if I hit myself or, you know, whatever, I actually take the time just to sit with it and allow whatever wants to flow. And my sense is, for me, it's a more of a healing path. Obviously everyone's individual, some people might choose something different, but I find it is helpful. And I can feel as I take that time, my body is settling, any of the shock of the injury settles down. I'll tell you a funny story, this has just literally come to mind. A few years ago I was walking along a footpath, and I was actually just outside a pub, and it had a busy terrace area, and somehow my shoelaces got caught on a buckle of my other boot, and I just literally went bang straight down onto the tarmac. And it was quite an impact. Yeah, like I could tell that I'd got a lot of shock up my arm, and yeah, and I knew that it felt for me like I didn't want to move for a while. So I just lay there, and I allowed the energy to take its time to re-establish itself through my body, and I cried and I shook a bit, and yeah, maybe I was there for 10 minutes. And quite a few people came out to the pub from the pub and were like, oh, you okay? You know, do we need to call an ambulance or anything like that? And I'm like, no, don't worry, I'm totally fine. I'm just taking my time to let my body do the healing it needs to do in order to work through what's here. And they were all really sweet and helpful, but I think they found it unusual for a person to be taking that time for themselves. And so why am I telling this story? I suppose I'm telling it to give ourselves more permission to take time and to just be with the hurt and allow whatever wants to flow through in the same way that a kid might do. So that's tears when we get hurt. When else might we cry? We might cry after we've gone to a really stressful time, right? Like we've been really stressed, maybe a little bit uptight, we've been having to get on and do things and keep everything together, as it were. I'm laughing at myself just saying that, keeping everything together. And we get to a point where we feel we can relax and we just cry. And it's such a release, isn't it? Just like, oh, such a release. And maybe we could have more micro releases along the journey. So rather than storing it up until we really, really need to cry, we could like just have these little releases of tension. I have a sort of a track for how maybe anxious or like sort of that feeling of anxiety, and when it's catching my attention, I'll be like, is there something that wants to flow through here? Is there perhaps some sadness that wants to flow through? And then sometimes I just might cry a little bit, and then off I go on my day again. And at this point I want to address, because there might be people here that have never cried or never in their memory cried, and there might be other people that cry a lot. And I just want to say how welcome everyone's experience is, and totally not to make it wrong if we don't have access to our tears. A really dear friend of mine, beautiful woman, she couldn't remember ever crying, and actually I saw her with her first tear a few years ago, and it was so moving, and she was so touched because she had wanted to cry but it just wasn't available to her. And she still doesn't cry very often, and she would wish for herself that she cried more, but little by little she's in the process of allowing that through her system for whatever reason that's stopping her. So when else might we cry? One other territory I think that's interesting is this whole sense of when we're adults, we perhaps only cry when something, or give ourselves permission to cry when something feels really bad. So it's only perhaps when we've had a bereavement or something's gone really wrong that we give ourselves permission to cry. And again, coming back to children, whatever happens, they can just cry if like someone's said something nasty to them, or they've had something difficult at school, they can just cry. And wouldn't it be really sweet if we could also embrace our tears in that way? Allow the tears, whether it's a super hard experience or it's just a little bit difficult. And I'm laughing a lot, aren't I, for talking about tears, but I think that is the way it goes, that when we let it out, we then can laugh more. And there was one thing that I wanted to touch on, and I can't quite remember what it is right now. Let me just tune in. Maybe it's something else that wants to be said. So tears and showing our tears can so open the hearts of people around us, showing that we're moved by something, showing that we're deeply feeling something. And that feels like a precious gift, especially now, I think, when we're living in a world where we're occupied or preoccupied by maybe climate change, maybe the pandemic. So being able to connect with our sadness and our tears helps us to recognise our hearts, our humanness, our sense of feeling, our sense of compassion, which is probably the biggest, well, maybe one of the biggest gifts of being human. Our heartfulness, and being able to share our heartfulness. And then in that shared compassion, being able to recognise that maybe something wants to change, or if it doesn't want to change, it just wants to have space and presence and connection, either being true. I think I could talk about this subject quite a lot, but I'm going to draw to a close there with this sense of let's say yes to tears, both our own and to others. Let's invite ourselves to hold presence for ourselves when we're feeling tears arising. And let's invite ourselves to hold presence for others when tears are arising. Just being able to hold that lovely, compassionate space. Let's celebrate that we can cry, or we have the possibility to cry now or in the future. And that is a connection into our hearts, into our humanness, into our compassion, into our care, into that magic of our human experience. I would love to hear your experience of your tears and whether you've changed on your journey, whether you cry more easily now or less easily. And yeah, any interesting things you've got to share with us all, please do post your comments below. And if you think this video might resonate with anyone, do share it. And you can also subscribe to the channel and press notifications and press like if you have done. And if you want to hear about more about me and my work, you can go to www.resonating.love. Sending you so much love, sending you the invitation to embrace all of ourselves and to allow the natural impulse to arise in us like we would in our playful, childish, best selves, so that we can feel whole and healed and free.